A lot of people, when I share things like this, where I push them a little bit further to figure out like their own parking space, as I like to call it, and they say, I don't think I have anything different to share. And I think we all do. It's just that we don't give it enough thought or enough time. And we are all about putting content out there, getting out there, and which is good. But you, I think we all have something different to say. It's just whether you want to be led down that trail, whether you want to kind of follow those little breadcrumbs. And we all have those hunches where we think that doesn't sound right, or this, something is just not right about this. And we are just too quick to follow the existing narrative that we don't want to change it or explore it in greater detail.
Well, happy Monday, friend. Welcome to another episode. We are rounding out our 4-part series around helping you get more confident and being uniquely you with your brand voice as you show up in a bigger way on the second half of this year. I just wrapped up recording with my last guest of this series, Meera Kothand, and oh my goodness, am I so thrilled for you to hear this interview. I don't recall where I came across knowing Meera. I think she or potentially someone on her team sent us a pitch for the podcast. And immediately I was like, yes, this gal, she knows what she's doing. She's been in the industry for 6 years. She is an accomplished author. Let me pull up the official bio because it's fancy and she's got the swagger and the skills to back it up. She's an email marketing strategist, a 3-time Amazon bestselling author of the books The 1 Hour Content Plan, which, side note, we'll link that in the show notes. We talk about it. I think it's a really great one for you to snag. She's also written The Blog Startup and the But I'm Not an Expert. She's also the publisher of MeeraKothand.com, an award-winning site listed as the top 100 sites for solopreneurs in 2020, 2018, and 2017, and the popular Create Planners. Now, we talk about all the things digital marketing. I'll let her, she'll kind of share with you a little bit more about what she does and who she works with. But one of the things that I thought was really fascinating was, so Meera's in a completely different time zone halfway around the world. And at the time of the recording, I mean, it was first thing in the morning for her, last thing in the day for me. But, we talk so often about, in this world of online, there's this idea that we have to figure out our brand voice. And to do that, we have to study so intimately who our ICA is, our ideal customer avatar, as they say, and we name her and we know what kind of coffee she drinks and we know what she likes to read and where she spends her time online. And quite frankly, if you are a white woman business owner, most likely your ICA, as you describe her, looks exactly like you, but you 6 years ago. And it's just how we've been trained to do ICAs. It's just inherently we choose to work with people that look similar to us or feel similar to us or have similar struggles. Like, it just makes sense on that model. What we talk about today was with Meera working halfway across the world. Her clientele is primarily here in North America. So she shares her story of understanding her brand voice, knowing that she lives in a culture where when she grew up, entrepreneurship wasn't really a thing. But she somehow still stumbled into it and then determined that the people she wanted to work with were the people who were talking about this online business thing here in North America. And that's where she wanted to do business. So it's been really fascinating listening to her story, but talking about how she was able to stay authentic to her voice and understand the voice of her audience and connect in a way that was authentic and meaningful. And she's really built a very robust and amazing business working with people that don't sound like or look like her. And it's really powerful as she talks through her approach to brand voice, her approach to what voice looks like in business, how we need to be listening to our gut more and challenging the ways that other educators are just telling us to do things because that's quote unquote the way it's always been done. We need to trust our guts a little bit more. And I just love the conversation. I think you are going to love it too. And for all the links we talk about today, you can grab them in the show notes Or if you want a little bit more of a visual experience, remember you can watch these episodes at heathersager.com/podcast, and you can find the related episode. We also talk about storytelling today, and I'll link to all those episodes here around how you can unlock the power of telling even better stories. I think you're going to love this episode. And hey, before you jump in, if you've been listening to these things around wanting to get your brand voice down and you're thinking, oh man, I really want to show up more confidently and authentically to connect with my audience. If you want to nail your messaging and start attracting the kind of people that you want to work with into your business, be sure to head on over to heathersager.com/speak, where you're going to get access to my latest free training where I'm going to teach you step by step how you go through and create more confidence to nail your message on any kind of platform you speak on, so that you're attracting the right people that you want to work with and not attracting people that you really don't want to do business with. So let's say you are wanting to attract higher end, higher ticket. We got to make sure your messaging's dialed in to represent that. So head on over heathersager.com/speak. And now let's jump into the episode. Well, hey friends, welcome back to another episode. I am thrilled today to be rounding out our series all about your brand voice with my guest, Meera. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Heather.
We were just joking before we hit record that we are like two ships passing in the night right now of like, this is like the quintessential different time zones. It's the end of my day, very start of yours. So I will embrace if you're drinking all the coffee on today's episode.
Coffee is pumping through my veins. I've already got it down.
It's perfect. Well, I am super excited to get to know you further today, to have my audience get to know you. We're talking about brand voice and personality, and specifically what I love when you so eloquently pitched this idea over to my team around connecting with your audience, not just in an authentic voice, but how do you connect with people who are different than you, with different experiences, they look different, sound different, all those things. Like, I'm so excited to dig into this today because I feel like this is something that people don't talk about and it needs to be talked about. So before we jump into all that good stuff, why don't you share a little bit with my audience around who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Meera. I'm a digital marketing strategist and Amazon bestselling author. And through my digital courses and books, I help solopreneurs, small business owners go from sub-zero when they're just starting out to getting to that first milestone of making a full-time income from their online business, and then going on to getting to that 80K or 100K a year. So I think my zone of genius really is in sharing strategies that are what I call minimum viable. So doing just what is necessary, nothing more, nothing less, and really drilling down into just working on what is necessary for your stage of growth so that you make the biggest impact in the smallest amount of time, especially if you're a time-strapped person. Maybe you're working a 9 to 5, you're trying to transition over, you have a child, you've got kids at home and stuff like that. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, kind of like how I help my audience.
Yeah. Okay. When you talk about this, like the minimal viable piece, like minimal viable product, that's like a very, I guess it's common language, but I think a lot of people don't really realize what that means. And when I thinking about the digital course space, thinking about coaches and course creators, we're going to go on a random tangent here for a second, because I see so many people get stuck trying to build these products and programs that are like the Tesla version of a online product or program. I would imagine that's why you do what you do. Can you talk a little bit about, like, why did you land on this idea of the minimum viable product?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, when I started out, just to kind of lean into how you presented me, I'm like 15 hours, 12 hours away from where my ideal audience is. So if it's the end of the day, it's the start of the day for me. And I really had to drill down into just what I can do to get launched, to get started out. And I didn't have a lot of time, because when I launched my business 6 years back, I had a 2-year-old. And she was a really fussy eater and sleeper and all of that stuff. So I had a very short amount of time. Yeah, exactly. So I had a very short amount of time. So I really had to drill into what I could do that would kind of enable me to show up
Yeah.
and do the work and still feel like I'm making progress. So I feel minimum viable, very often people just tie it to products. But I bring in that concept or mentality into every little thing in terms of content or in terms of dealing with email marketing or in terms of dealing with visibility or with social media. And I had to do it because it was a necessity for me to really survive and feel any kind of growth or traction. So a lot of things that I had to really throw out a lot of things that people were saying at that time when I was really getting to get my business out there, being everywhere, having a presence, the requirement to have a presence on lots of different social media platforms like Instagram or Facebook, showing up on live streams. So I understood the need for visibility and I prioritized that, but I still wanted to do it in my own way and show up in a position where it was still within my zone of genius. And this is what I like to share with everyone in my audience who comes to me and says, I don't think I have the time. I don't think I have this. And I say, yeah, then do the minimum viable piece, just do these elements that will require you, that will allow you to launch and still feel that traction, still feel that growth. Because it's all about the tiny steps.
Yeah. And where do you think people get stuck in that approach? Like what is it that holds them back thinking that like, is it just that in their head, like that's too simple, it wouldn't work?
I think it's not just about them. I think it's all of these different narratives around in the space, in the online space, that has just been breeding for years about the need to launch really massive products and courses and memberships, which is why I loved your conversation with Zach Spuckler about the tiny product, which I absolutely love. And I think this is where people kind of go down the rabbit hole. They think they need to do this. They think they need to do that. So I don't think it's so much the issue with them, but the issue with the conversations and the way things have been going on in the space. And people who have had success because they started 15, 20 years ago, kind of translating that narrative from 20 years back to today, which doesn't really work. But that's what people buy into. So I think it's more reason because of that rather than what they think.
Yeah. Okay. It's so funny. I was having this conversation with Zafira Rajan, who is on the show 2 episodes back. And we were just talking about this idea that people are launched out like that, exactly what you were just saying, where it's like these big launches with all these bells and whistles and all these different strategies for lead magnets. And we see it happen, right, with the really big players. And then people try to model that. And like what you said, what happened or what worked 10 years ago or what works at a $10 million business level, it doesn't translate for somebody who's trying to launch their first program or product. Right. And it doesn't really mesh.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, like many of those narratives, I just don't. When I heard them and when I was starting, I'm like, that doesn't really sound right. Like your first product has to be this, or if you're not having a 6-figure launch, it means that you're not doing something right, or it's just all of these different things. And at the end of the day, it's all about the type of business you want to run. And I think there's this saying where, I don't want to build an empire. So it really depends on what you want out of it and what you have the time for, because I think people have seasons in their life, and some seasons you focus on something and some seasons you focus on others. And just because you're not doing all of the things doesn't mean that you don't have success, or you're not growing, or you're not having any type of progress.
Yeah, you got to figure that out for yourself. So, figure it out for yourself. Let's talk about brand voice, because I know that's a huge part of what you work on with your clients. And this idea that I think people think that there's some like secret unicorn recipe when it comes to having like the perfect brand voice to connect with your people, which I don't know, I just think is comical. So tell me a little bit about like, how do you describe, like, what is a brand voice, and where do you feel like the role of having a brand voice is for these business owners trying to attract the right people?
Yeah. So obviously your brand voice is a manifestation of your brand's personality, like whether you are the brand or you're under a different name. But I think it also has kind of like this symbiotic relationship with your beliefs and your values and your messages. I think you cannot see it as being separate, and it really feeds into one another.
Yeah.
So when I started out, obviously I had the logistical kind of difficulties in terms of the time zone and all of that. But that was like a very minor version, or a very minor problem compared to the other things that the fears and the uncertainties and anxieties. I mean, any creator for that matter, when you're putting a work out there, any type of work, whether it's a post or a product or a book, you have all of those things coming in, self-doubt and being afraid. But for me, I felt I had another layer. I didn't want to be judged by the way I spoke or the color of my skin or where I was from. I wanted my content to speak for itself. So I wanted that to be the first place before they got to know me, not the other way around. So I really doubled down into trying to figure out my parking space within all of these different conversations. So one of my favorite quotes is from the Clue Train Manifesto that says that markets are conversations. And it was really that struggle into figuring out, okay, amidst all of these different conversations, where is my spot? Where is my tiny little stake? Where can I put that stake in my ground? Because I felt I needed to not be judged, wanting to show up to that audience, that doesn't sound like me, it's in a completely different time zone. I really dug deep into trying to figure out where exactly is my spot. And I always referred to, and I would use this triangle kind of thing in, I call it like the 3 C's. So the first thing is the change. Where exactly do I think I can present things in a way that can be said better or can be explained better? Things that are already out there that people have been talking about for years, but that are not necessarily serving the audience. So putting a different spin on it, or representing it, or sharing in a different way. So that's the change. The other one is conflict or contrast. So where is it that you have an opposing point of view? So this doesn't mean just going out on purpose to find an opposing point of view or to rant about it. It's to be led by your hunches, or to be led by your, that doesn't really sound right. And I had that for a lot of those instances when people were sharing, creating memberships for a membership site for someone who's brand new, who has no sales engine, with no audience, and you're telling them to go and create a membership. Like these were the things where I was like, this doesn't sound right. I always kind of follow the trail, and where does that lead me into forming my own message? So yeah, that's one other C. And the last one is to what I like to call sowing seeds of discord, where you are trying to kind of create some conflict, where you're getting them to rethink their existing perspective on it. So just to kind of, rethink, do you really need that huge course? Could you start with something smaller? Could you do this? So I would always think along these 3 C's, conflict, contrast, and then change. And any type of content that I put out there, I wanted to make sure that I was speaking along these angles so that I would stand out. And this fed into the evolution of my brand voice. Obviously there's an element of what is important to you. What are your values? But I also have to clarify, okay, if I'm going to say, I want to show up, this is my brand personality. Maybe it's compassion. Maybe it's being confident, or maybe it's being smart, but you have to clarify what it is and what it isn't, because there's this really thin line between being snarky and then being arrogant, and then just being on the line at confident. Or even if you're compassionate, what is the other end of the spectrum? When, let's say, your site is down and then you are trying to apologize to your audience, what is too apologetic, or what is the other end of the spectrum? Yeah. So I think all of these are discussions, and it's not something that you get on day one. It's really an evolution. And the way I spoke about, the way I wrote, the way I showed up, the voice in general has changed over the years. And I think that's fine, because with each year of your business, you get more and more clarity with the people you serve, what they look out for. And yeah, I mean, I think it shouldn't be something that you feel you need to get right from the first day.
I agree. And I think it's one of those things that in my opinion, there never ever is a perfect right, because it's evolving, because your audience is evolving, you're evolving as a person, as a business. When you were talking about the contrast piece, and you're talking about like the balance between figuring out, is it too much? Is it not enough? I always envision this like balance scale, or a teeter totter, whatever analogy works for anyone listening who's not seen my hands, where you are constantly dancing one end or the other. And most often business owners go a little too far one way. And I think the people who rise up and have stronger voices are the ones who don't get scared and jump off. They're like, okay, that was a little far, or like, that didn't feel right. Like, let me come back over here. And it's constantly figuring out the balance, not where you sit in the middle, because if you aren't bold and you don't go out and share your opinions, in the middle isn't going to get you connection with people. But you have to be comfortable going out and teetering one way, and then having the confidence to come back. I think when you talk about like that ego versus like way too humble, I talk about confidence versus humility all the time. It's that same piece. It's like, I think that's the sexiness. I talked about this a few episodes back. The sexiness of the people who show up that we're attracted to are the people who are confident of knowing they don't know everything, but they sure as hell believe in what they're saying as to be a really good strategy or a good way of thinking. I think it's really important.
And I think a lot of people, when I share things like this, where I push them a little bit further to figure out like their own parking space, as I like to call it, and they say, I don't think I have anything different to share. And I think we all do. It's just that we don't give it enough thought or enough time. And we are all about putting content out there, getting out there, and which is good, but I think we all have something different to say. It's just whether you want to be led down that trail, whether you want to kind of follow those little breadcrumbs. And we all have those hunches where we think that doesn't sound right, or this, something is just not right about this. And we are just too quick to follow the existing narrative, that we don't want to change it or explore it in greater detail.
And why do you think people are so quick to dismiss their hunches? Because I noticed, so a lot of people, especially people in my audience, are, badass women who have had really powerful careers that they're now wanting more flexibility. They want more of the kind of work for themselves life. But there's something that happens between like, hey, I'm a badass in corporate, or I'm a professional attorney, or whatever it is, right? We move into the space and then they don't trust their gut. So how do you help? Like, why do you think when they're not trusting their hunch, even though they might have such great experience?
I think there are a couple of things. One is because of there can be really huge looming voices in the space where we think that if they're doing it this way and they're saying that, it has to be right. And I'm new to this, so I might as well follow that, because who am I to craft this brand new narrative, or who am I to judge this, or who am I to say this? And they are earning big bucks and they seem to have it together. So that could be one thing. Another thing is, I do feel that it really goes back to that time. One, and having that feeling that I have to get launched, I have to get this out there. And when you have the timepiece, you want to kind of numb down on the other aspects. You don't really want to dive deep into those hunches and this and that. Like for me, there are certain things that I kind of had a vague idea and I knew I wanted to explore this further, but at that point in time, the idea wasn't really fully developed. And it took me some time for anything, like when I was talking about digital products or even talking about content or brand voice. Some ideas, it takes time for them to evolve in your own head so that you get some clarity about, this is exactly how it fits in. You might have these pieces not really gelling together, and that's fine. And I think we all have this fear of just sitting with something that's unfinished in our heads and feeling like we need to put it out there. If not, it's just not going anywhere. Let's just chuck it aside. So I think we hesitate to just sit with something that's unfinished or share something that's unfinished. I think it really boils down to that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think people are, as you said, they have enough experience to know that somebody knows how to do it. So they may as well just model that piece. But when they have that little like, you're right. There's like the speed at which they want the results mutes
Right.
that gut feeling. I think that it is just very fascinating to see that happen. Okay, I want to hear from you. One of the things that really struck me was when you were talking about the fact that you built your business in a completely different culture halfway around the world. So are most of your clients and customers in US, like North America?
Yeah, they are. So I serve people from all around the world, but a lot of my audience, like I would say 70% are in North America. Yeah.
Okay. So this is what's fascinating to me. And you probably see this all the time in Facebook groups with your clients. How much time people sit going, who's my ideal customer? And they write down and they journal, what cozy sweater is she wearing? Which magazine is she reading? What candle scent? And we spent like, we have to visualize to imagine who we're talking with, right? We got to know who our audience is. But I would imagine, I mean, it's difficult for most online business owners to really get their person. But for you, you have the additional element of like, my person is halfway across the world. I am not. My person doesn't look like me, doesn't sound like me, isn't building my kind of like, so walk us through like how that experience was for you and how you were able to figure out your voice to connect with somebody who was different in a variety of ways.
Yeah, I love that question because it is so true that all of these exercises about your ideal audience, you can only use them to a certain extent. After that, it's really the dealing with them and engaging with them on one-to-one or when you're interacting with them via emails, that has to come in. So whatever exercise you're doing, that just maybe carries you a 20 or 30%. For me, like you said, I didn't really. There are a lot of cultural things like spaces and shops and like whatever they visited, things that I didn't really understand or I couldn't really relate to. Like, there's a difference between shopping at Costco's versus shopping at Target versus, so there's a different type of person who shops at all these different places. So it took me a little bit of time to understand all of these different nuances. I still don't, to be honest. I still don't get the full extent of it because I haven't really lived in the States for me to understand all of this. So why is it that my ideal client is in the States? Is because I was led by the conversation. I knew what I wanted to be a part of, and I wanted to go where they were having that conversation. So when I started out 6 years back, where I'm from in Singapore, it was still a very 9 to 5 type of culture. It still is. So people starting blogs, people starting podcasts, it was very new at that point in time. It was like a very novel idea. It still is. It's not as evolved, I would say, as what people are doing back there. There is a very small number of creatives in Singapore who are kind of venturing out into all of this. So which is why I wanted my ideal client was someone in the States because I was led by the conversations. So for me, it was, like I said, I didn't know a lot of all of these nuances, but I really went deep into identifying who I didn't want to serve because it was very hard to identify who I wanted to serve, but I knew what didn't gel with my brand. So and this is what actually helped me knowing, okay, this person, I may not really get a full picture, but I definitely know this is not who I wanted to serve. People who identified with, maybe people who identified with calling themselves like a mom boss or a mompreneur. Like those terms I knew were not part of my brand. So these are the things that I
gotta laugh for a moment because there's people in my audience. I'm sure there's people in the audience that use that, but I also know there's a huge segment of my audience who are like, do not call me that. Like, do not, like, they are offended by it. And for me, I'm like, meh, either way. But it is, people are very hell-bent on like whether or not they call themselves a mompreneur or a girl boss or whatever else. Anyways, if you have feelings around these terms, just know you're not alone, whichever side of the spectrum you're on.
So girl boss is another thing that you reminded me. So I knew these were the things the audience was attracting. I mean, sure, there would be people who probably kind of still view themselves like that or call themselves that, which is fine. But I would not use those words, were not a part of my brand vocabulary.
Yeah.
Correct. It's just not for me. So I think that helped me more in identifying what I was not, what my brand vocabulary would not include, like XO, signing off with XO, or calling my audience lovelies or babes. It's just not me. It's not me. It's not a part of my.
Would you call him boo? Like, hey, boo? No, I was joking.
Oh God, no.
But I one time did that, and it was like, no, immediately no. Yeah. But I'll totally do the XO thing, and I call everybody friends.
Yeah. Friend is fine for me, but it's just clarifying what you're not about. So that exercise helped me more, especially when I didn't really get a grasp of who this person is. So I had this idea of who this person was, roughly in a sense of, okay, maybe she's going to be a stay-at-home mom trying to start a side hustle. She probably had 2 kids. I had that. And over time, within a year, I realized that it is completely different. And I didn't really want to speak to that audience anymore. Sure, there were lots and lots of people within my audience who are moms, who had kids, as am I, but I felt, no, I was not really doing that person justice, because a lot of the things I spoke about, the way I communicated, was just not speaking to that one person. Yeah. So it evolved and it shifted just a year and a half into it. So I think my only takeaway is, if you have struggled figuring out who this person is, clarify who that person is not. What other words will not be a part of your brand vocabulary? And it helps you a lot with knowing how to write and how to show up and how to, when you're visible, getting visible, what language would you be using? So that helps to kind of counter the vagueness and everything that comes with trying to figure out who this person is.
Okay. I love that you went here on your like, hell no, this is my not list. I know it's so funny because it's like, that's kind of seems negative, and it's totally right up my alley, because if anybody listening, think about this. A lot of people struggle to articulate what they want their brand to look like or feel like. So for example, like when you're working with a graphic designer and you're trying to describe your stuff, like there's no way. But when somebody sends you a draft, you're like, I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like that. And people think like, oh my gosh, I don't want to tell a designer that because that's mean. But designers are like, it's the only feedback I'm going to get. Give me the feedback because it shows me what you don't want, so I can do the like different. Like, so side tangent, but this idea around identifying what you don't want or what don't resonate, that's sometimes way more powerful than describing the like quote unquote ideal, because the ideal, let's be honest, y'all, when you're writing that stuff down, it still feels kind of fluffy. But like the don't list is like laser specific. Like when you called out, like, I do not say XOXO, or I do not say lovies, or I do not say girl boss, or like those things, like we can laugh about it. It also is very concrete, creating a picture of like closer to who you are and how you want to show up. So like, I think it's beautiful because I think a lot of people get stuck on that. So if you're listening, Meera just dropped a really incredible, like powerful branding voice piece. Make your do not list. Like I see people gripe about it all the time on Instagram of like, I hate the term hustle, or I hate this term. Perfect. Add it on your do not include list. Doesn't mean it's bad for other people. It just means it's not for you.
Yeah. And I actually had someone in my audience, I think it was a webinar or a training I was doing some time back. And I actually said this very thing. And she was like, wouldn't that be, like you said, isn't that negative, or isn't that a little bit blunt, because you're trying to say all of these people are not a part of that? And any kind of content that you put out there, any work, any piece of work that you're putting out there, you're automatically going to attract and repel an audience, whether you know it, you want to or not. It's just the way it is. So you'd rather repel people early on than attract everyone in, and then when it's time to do business with you, they realize, no, she's not my person, or I can't see myself doing business with her. So I'd rather get only the right people in, keep it a tight group, then kind of open the gates and welcome everyone in. And yeah.
It's just it is a funny conversation in general. Okay. I'm curious what were some other things that you work through kind of figuring out your brand voice, working with once you identified who your person was not, right? So what are some of the other things that you had to work through to really figure out what voice would connect?
For me, it was, like one of the things I said, it was like clarifying what my voice is not, what my voice is about. What the other thing is the type of channel that I wanted to use. There's a lot of misconception, or I feel there's this unnecessary pressure of thinking, okay, you have to show up on YouTube, or have to show up on a podcast, or have to show up in on a blog, and do it in all of these different mediums. But sometimes I feel the channel that you choose kind of attracts a separate audience to something else. And there's a lot of pressure to be in all of these places. But sometimes the way you show up and what you're writing, there's a little bit of difference in your voice. So for me, it was kind of like bridging the gap between, okay, I'm showing up on writing a post, this is my voice. And now when I'm starting to do video, how am I going to bridge that so that they don't feel like who they're watching sounds like someone who's completely different from who they just met on the blog, or the type of things that you're sending in your email. So this is one thing that I really had to get clear on. And I actually went far enough to kind of do this brand sheet, in a sense of keeping note of, okay, these are my words, these are not. And this is how I would say it, so that there's a little bit of consistency in how people viewed me. So every single node, wherever they viewed me within my brand ecosystem, whether it's on Instagram or on a podcast or a YouTube, or back in my on email, besides the brand voice, is also the messages that I wanted to put across, because you don't want to send anything that was contrasting, that's contradictory to what you are about. And when you've been in business for some time, sometimes you realize, hey, no, that's not what I believe in. Why did I just say that? Or how did I? It kind of misses you, or certain things where you've shared and you stand by, and it gets lost with all of the content that's out there. So it's useful to have this little tiny brand sheet where you have all of your important points and what you believe in, what are your values, what you stand for, the words and all of that. So for me, that was very helpful in helping me bridge all of these different channels that I was showing up on. Because initially it was very simple. It was just a blog. It was just email. But after that, it was like a podcast or a summit or this and that. And just trying to bring it all back to your brand anchor and keeping it there. That was very helpful.
So I hear, okay, my brain goes in a lot of different places. So we'll take this wherever you feel comfortable going with. I would imagine writing a blog, right, and emails, you have a lot of control over the language, right, that you use and the words that you use. And one of the things, like when I do Q&As with my audience, I get a lot of questions from people who live around the world in other countries, or people who live in the States that have accents. And I get questions around delivery skills, around like, how do I navigate my accent on video to be able to better connect with my customer? So I want you to go here and talk for a minute, is that there's a shift, right? Just when you feel like you're getting your groove in business, like writing things down, we're like, shit, go live. So like it's not just a stair step to like go live, like someone who speaks in the same language of their audience, like shows up like there's a lot of privilege there for someone who looks like me, who sounds like me, be able to do a podcast. But for someone, especially when you're working with people in a completely different country around the world, I would imagine that hurdle was pretty high. So can you talk a little bit about like that? Because I know there are people listening who they're struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely certain words, the way I say it, is very different from how someone else would say it. And we have this whole British English, American English, naturally, initially, a lot of my content, the writing part, I was following a lot of British English because that is what we were kind of taught. That's like our first language here. But and a lot of people didn't identify with, and they would actually say, what is this? Why is it spelled? And this should be spelled in this way. So that was one element. But coming to that accent thing, and I knew that this would be an issue. And it was one of my fears when I started out. And people, when I started to create digital products, obviously I would make sure there was a transcript there, there's the captions there. Those I would say is the bare minimum. I would do those. But I would still, every now and then, I would get someone who would say, I like you, but I don't understand what you're saying. I can't follow through. And it was painful. that even though I did all of that, they still came back with this feedback. But I had to kind of switch into knowing that it's not about me. It's just the way it is. Some people are able to catch on quickly when you give them all of these resources. They're able to catch on, and some people aren't. So the only thing to do is, give them a refund and just not take it on yourself. It's not about you. And there are times when I would be doing live streams. This was, I think, a couple of years back, when every now and then they would be having discussions in the chat, and they would be, what is it that Meera just said? I couldn't catch on. And then someone would clarify, say, oh, she meant this. It's just her accent. So when I would be going back and looking at the FAQ, I'm like, seriously? And I would try not to let that affect me at that point in time.
Yeah.
Now it just doesn't, because there are some words, not a lot, a few words, where I've changed the way I say it so that they would understand it better. But it was more of just how, especially when I use it a lot in terms of when I'm teaching something or trying to get a message across, I want to make it easier for them. But generally, I still show up the way I am. I've not done anything differently to change my accent. As you can tell, it's just the same way.
Beautiful,
I've not worked. I've not worked with anyone. I know people sometimes work with people to try and change their accents. I've not done any of that. Like a couple of words I've changed my way just because it helps the audience better to grasp it better. But beyond that, no. I feel when I show up in my authentic self, it serves them better. Yeah. And I don't want to become another, like a cookie cutter version of someone else. And it's very interesting because I was having a discussion with someone the other day. It was on another podcast, and she said something, and I knew the moment it was out of her mouth, she regretted saying it. And she said, I love talking to you because you're so animated with your gestures and all of that. And I embrace it. I'm like, yes, exactly. I am very animated, especially when it's a topic that I love to speak on. So I bring all of these quirks. And I know that sometimes, a lot of influencers that I see on video, probably not as animated as I am, but this is me. And when they buy your products and services, they buy into a little bit of you and a little bit of your brand story. And I want that to be the case. So I'm going to show up the way I am, accent, animated gestures, and all of that stuff. Yep. Because this is the brand that they're buying into, not a mini cookie cutter of someone else's.
All the hand gestures are welcome here.
Yes, all of those. I know I recently discovered that I have very long, anybody who watches the videos of these, they know Heather I'm tall, I'm 5'11", and I don't know how that translates in the metric system, but anyway, I'm very tall, and I have very long hands and arms, and my hands, I've gotten comfortable with it, but I totally have gangly arms. And I have some videos on YouTube around hand gestures on video. And it's very weird getting comments from people around the world around my hands. Like there are a little couple creeper comments on my videos around like my hands. So now I'm like, whatever, take it or leave it. I have very large hand gestures. I'm okay with it. Hey, one of the things that you said around when you were talking about some of those moments where you're like, oh, in the chat, it's like what's happening. It reminds me of what you were saying earlier around how you have to take risks. And we talked about that teeter-totter. And that was, I think, a really beautiful moment that I want to honor and point out, where each of us has our own thing, right? Where we start second guessing or doubting ourselves for a variety of different ways. And in that moment comes when like you can play that story in your head around like, oh my gosh, people don't get me. Or someone might be like, oh, I'm not smart enough for this or qualified enough for this or whatever else. And when that happens, it's like that split second, you go out on that like teeter-totter, and your resiliency able to come back and be like, nope, I know what I'm doing. I know this is me. They're going to get the real me. I love that you talk about that. It's fascinating with me. I'll share, I've never shared this publicly before, but I talk openly about my hearing loss. So I wear hearing aids. I've had a hearing loss for 15 years. And one of the things that people don't realize is when it comes to hearing loss, we actually hear through our brains. And so our brains are trying to like make sense of different sounds. And one of the things that I really struggle with is communicating with people who have accents.
because my brain, my ears and my brain have been programmed to process sounds, and I'm around people who speak English, in person. And now that I'm working with people over the world, my brain's not used to hearing all these different accents. So my brain literally cannot make out the sounds. So one of the things that's been really fascinating for me is how uncomfortable I get in conversations, not because of the conversation, but because I literally cannot understand the words.
Right.
And it's one of those things where I develop like this awareness of going, okay, communication is two ways. Anyone who has any kind of communication challenge, whether it's in speaking, whether it's someone who's terrified of speaking, somebody who has an accent, somebody who has a hearing loss, it just reminds me that each of us have our own stories, and how we communicate can really impact how we approach our relationships with other people. And sometimes us being in our own head can really, really be destructive on that. So I just wanted to share that. It's just interesting because I've never really had a conversation around just that piece before. And it's a fascinating conversation. And I hope that more people are, talking about things that say we all communicate in different ways. Let's figure out how to be even better at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's fascinating. Okay. That was a random tangent here. Okay. You had a couple tips and strategies for people who are really wanting to get stronger with their brand voice. They want to start showing up more boldly. When you think about this digital marketing space, what tips would you give people for showing up more consistently or more boldly, more authentically with their voice?
Yeah. I think one of the things is to really drill deep into knowing and figuring out what stories you want to keep as part of your kind of like your brand package. And we all have different stories, and some stories work because they align with our business. Some stories you may choose to, this is not for this audience, or this is not for this particular brand. And for me, one of the things that I was a little bit hesitant on sharing when I started out was because I couldn't resonate with this narrative or this thought of everyone sharing that they knew they wanted to be an entrepreneur. They knew this from 5 or 6 or whatever that is. And they traded cards. They were the kids with the lemonade stand and all of that. And I couldn't resonate with that because it was not a part of how I grew up.
Yeah.
So my cultural experience, in a sense, the family that I was raised in, was you went to college, you got your degree, you go get a job. Entrepreneurship is for others. So doing this in itself is, I'm the first person in my family. So I couldn't resonate with all of that. And choosing to share that story about I'm the last person who should ever become an entrepreneur, I was very hesitant because I didn't know if people would go the other way and all of that, but I still chose to use that. And I'm so amazed because there's so many people like I mentioned, my main audience is in North America. They writing back and saying that they felt the same way, and how they also couldn't identify with how others felt. Entrepreneurship was in their bones and they knew it. So when you choose to share certain stories, there's a lot of fear and hesitation around them. But so the main thing is to figure out what stories you're going to share and how that relates to your audience, because you don't just want to share something for the sake of it. How does that relate back to them, helping them identify or helping them understand your brand better? So those are the type of stories that you want to pick. And it's perfectly fine for you to take that story out and share something else in. It's not that you're changing your story. It's not that you're lying about it. It's just that you're choosing to share a different story that's part of your life. And sometimes your audience evolves, your brand evolves, and you can choose to share different things. Like, in the early days, a lot of the stories I was sharing was about being a stay-at-home mom. But when my audience shifted and I decided to kind of pivot, story that I chose to share shifted as well. It's still mine. It's just that I'm sharing something else. So it's really figuring out what forms a part of your brand package. That's one of those things. So yeah, that was very helpful for me to do, and it took a lot of kind of like getting over that kind of like crossing over that little bridge. So yeah, I think with every stage that you are in business, there is a lot of there's always that fear. There's always that uncertainty. It just comes in lots of different forms. Like the first, trying to figure out the accent and the the brand voice, and seeing if they would identify with you, and then crossing that hurdle into something else, and then it just moves on. And I think getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is very important when you are in this space.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think when you were talking about the different stories from the different angles piece, I like it. Brilliant on what you said. It's okay to tell a different angle on your story. It doesn't mean that you're being inauthentic. It doesn't mean that you were lying the first time. It's all of us. Like, I like to imagine this. It's our stories are like a book on the shelf that you can open to any page. And that in itself, that page is perfectly great to share. Or you can share a different chapter in the book. Like, it doesn't have to be so sequential. I think that's what people struggle with so often, is they think that they have to have this perfect, I hate the term, the perfect origin story. And I just say BS. Like, the story you share is going to be based around who you're speaking to and the message that you're trying to convey. So, which, spoiler, like if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I need help with that, go back to the signature story episode. We'll link to, there's quite a few episodes we've done on the show around storytelling. So if what Meera is talking about is really interesting, binge listen to a few of those. Do you have, like, we're going to wrap it up here, but do you have any like little gems that you like to share with people when it comes to sharing stories? Like, any tips that you give people around what makes a really great story for an audience?
Yeah, there are the types of stories you can share. And like you said, the origin story is one of them. But there are also stories that you can share around why you created a product. So I have a few different categories that you can kind of attribute different stories to, like the origin, or why you came up with the product, or even with your clients. Like one of the stories that I've shared when it relates to trying to teach people about email and email marketing was an interaction I had with someone in a Facebook group, where she was sharing with me that she had a list of about 20,000 people whom she had not emailed in, I think, over a year or something of that sort. And she was terrified because the idea of emailing that list again and getting all of those unsubscribes and having that list go stale, it was kind of like a realization for her that very well could be a reality. So sharing that story, that interaction, helps your ideal audience learn something about what you want to take away. So don't just look at stories from, okay, my story, my origin, but lots of stories all over the place from your interactions or with clients, or with anyone in that space for that matter. But the main thing about the story is, and I think this is where people get it wrong, always try to relate it back to how does this serve my audience? I think that's the main thing. Always come at it from an angle of service. Every single thing that you do, how does this serve them? How does this relate back to the goal that I'm trying to help them reach, or the transformation that I'm trying to give to them? I think this is the main thing. So if you're stuck and you think that you don't have a storytelling bone in your body, which is what I thought, I think we're just complicating the thing, because there are stories everywhere. We tell stories to our partners, or we tell stories to our friends every single day. Oh, this happened, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So there are lots of things like this that you can share with your clients. And for me, this was like a huge aha in knowing that, why am I complicating it? It doesn't have to be, like you said, this beautiful packaged story. It could be anything. The main thing is, how does it serve them? So I would say that is like my biggest tip when it comes to trying to figure out what stories to share. It's just that they're all over the place. You just need to know where to look and how to put it together so that it makes sense for them.
Totally pluck them out, which we can help you all with that. That story, the how to build a bank of stories. We'll connect to that episode in here. But one of the things I'm going to paraphrase here, when you were talking about how you saw somebody provoke something in Facebook group, it is like this question people can ask themselves is like, when we see someone posted in a Facebook group and we're like, oh, we would handle it this way, or, oh, this is our thought, or, oh, this is our solution. Ask yourself the question, what prompted that thought, or what prompted that idea? And that is the story. It's like, What's the story of the person struggling in the Facebook group? What challenge was your client having? What was your challenge or pain point? Like what prompted or provoked that idea or that piece of advice? I think people are so quick to jump into the solution. Everyone's giving like tips and the carousel posts and all the things on Instagram. Those are a dime a freaking dozen, y'all. I'm done with like just the easy, like how to fix something. If it isn't anchored in context, what's the problem surrounding it for why it actually matters? That's what's going to land you eyeballs and actual engagement. So you have to think about what provoked or prompted the idea or solution.
Yeah, that's so good. That's wow. Yeah, it's true. I think there's this. We want to, like you said, give solutions, but we don't want to sit with what brought that thing, that whole contact. Yeah, that's good. That gave me an aha moment.
Going to the doctor and having them like pouring medicine down your mouth without you're like, what's happening? Like, what's going on here? Nobody likes that. We need to understand the context. Oh my gosh. Okay. Meera, I could talk to you all morning your time. Like I would love to pour myself a little latte and sit here because you were just a pleasure. And your hand gestures are perfect. I don't know, like you and I, kindred souls here with the hands. But I know people are going to be so excited. They love this idea of being authentic. I love how you just approach things around connecting with people from storytelling and with heart and just leading with what they actually need, the not list, like so many good gems we had in here today. Where can people continue to learn from you, connect with you, and learn more about what it is that you do?
Yeah, so I'm over at meerakothand.com. But I think since we were talking about brand voice, one of the first things that they can do if they want to dive in a little bit deeper is to go on Amazon and check out my book, The 1 Hour Content Plan. That's like kind of like the first thing that if you want to dive a little bit deeper into my perspective. So this is the book that they can find on Amazon. And I think on socials all over, I'm just Meera Kothand. So it's easy to find me.
Okay, perfect. And we'll link to all of that, including the Amazon link, everything in the show notes. So if you guys can head over into the show notes, that'll take you over to the blog to get all the details and the summary of today. We covered quite a few tips and strategies, so I'll summarize those in the notes from today. But my goodness, Meera, you are a gem. Your clients who work with you, they are very, very lucky. And I feel very blessed that we had the opportunity to connect today.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks everyone for listening. Be sure to take a screenshot of this episode and tag both Meera and I on Instagram and tell us what you learned. Those shares really mean the world and it helps us get this message out to more people. So thank you for your shares and we will see you on the next episode.